Welcome to part 2 of this series on economics. This is going to be about lesson 1. Yes, part 2 is lesson 1. Don't look at me like that. This is lesson 1, as in lesson number 1, the number 1 lesson, the big thing you need to know. And what I'm going to do is deliver the lesson to you as it was told by Henry Hazlitt back in the 1940s when he wrote his book, Economics in One Lesson. This book is an easy read, highly recommended, and you can read it for free at the website of the Foundation for Economic Education. It really is amazing. Despite the fact that it was published in 1946, it is so relevant to today. His lesson is this: the art of economics consists in looking not merely at the immediate, but at the longer effects of any act or policy. It consists in tracing the consequences of that policy not merely for one group, but for all groups. So in other words, when you have an economic policy, what you need to be looking at is not only what you intend to come from it, or what you think is going to come from it, but also any side effects. You need to consider not just the effects on the target group, but what the effects are going to be on everybody else as well. It sounds like common sense, doesn't it? Unfortunately, it isn't. And all sorts of bad things happen because people just don't understand this lesson. And this is where you get into something very powerful called the law of unintended consequences. It's not really a law, it's kind of like Murphy's Law. Some people say the doctrine of unintended consequences, others say hidden costs or hidden effects or whatever. The idea is there's going to be other stuff that happens, kind of like if you take a medicine and it has the effect you want, but it also has these side effects. Same kind of idea. The law of unintended consequences says that you can't just change one thing and expect everything else to stay the way it is. Other things are going to be happening. You may think this sounds obvious, but it's amazing how many people just don't consider that when discussing or setting economic policies. So what are these other things? Well, let's just imagine that you're driving down the road and there's a place on the road where there's kind of a ditch with a drop-off, and that makes you nervous. And you think, gee, the government should put up a barrier there. And then the government does put up a barrier, and then you drive by again. Now think about how you would drive now that the barrier's there, as opposed to how you drove before the barrier came up. You drive pretty differently. Without the barrier, you're more cautious. Maybe you'd slow down. Maybe you're more alert. You really didn't want to go off the edge, and that risk encourages you to take greater caution. But with the barrier there, there's a lulling effect. You said, "Oh, I'm safer." Maybe not consciously, but still, you relax and drive by it, without the same level of caution you had before. And the unintended consequence is, before the barrier, people were driving more safely. That means that, paradoxically, we can expect there to be more accidents now that the barrier's there. Now, does that mean that such barriers are bad? No, not necessarily. It just means you have to consider all of the effects. You can't just put up the barrier and expect the same number and type of accidents there were before. You have to evaluate all of the effects. If the increased accidents just amount to minor bump-ups, nowhere near as severe as being injured going off into the ditch, then the barrier is probably a good thing. The point is, when you say, is a barrier going to be effective, you have to consider not only the results of particular accidents, but the consequences on the psychology of the drivers. You've got to consider them all and figure out which way wins out in the end. That's the essence of the law of unintended consequences, and if you want to learn more about that particular effect, look up the Peltzman effect. Now, the premier example of this in economics is something raised by Frederick Bastiat way back in the 19th century, and Hazlitt wrote about it in his book as well. It's called the broken window fallacy, and it goes like this. A shop owner has a store with a plate glass window. A boy comes along, throws a rock, and breaks out the window. Angry, this shop owner runs out and starts yelling at the boy, and it attracts a crowd. The crowd gets to thinking, why is he so mad at the boy? The boy has done something good, because now a glazier has worked. Someone has to make a new pane of glass, and there are also jobs for workmen to install the pane of glass. And then they'll have money to spend on goods from other stores, which means those stores will have more money to pay workers with, and on, and that increases the local economy. That's good for everyone. Don't be so selfish just because your window's broken. This is going to improve things for everyone. Well, this is a fallacy. And it's a fallacy for the reasons why I just said. They're thinking, oh, now a glazier has work. But he has work because a window has been broken. What if that window hadn't been broken? Let's say it costs $600 to replace the window. Well, what would the store owner have done with that $600 if the boy hadn't broken the window? Let's say he would have used it to buy a new suit. So what happens is he can't buy the suit anymore because that money he was going to use to buy the suit, he now has to use to pay for the new window. So the glazier's job comes at the cost of the tailor's job. But you never see that. You never see the lost suit. You never see what would have been done with the money. We can actually show this mathematically. Let's look at the value of a new window minus the value of the broken window. That is greater than the value of the new suit. That's why the business owner is going to spend the money to fix the window and decide not to get the new suit after all. The broken window might actually have a negative value because it lets in flies and messes with the air conditioning and everything, so that's not a good thing. So he wants his window fixed, and he wants his window to be fixed more than he wants to have a new suit. That's how the crowd's thinking. But what they're not doing is, they're not considering the value of the new window versus the value of the old but unbroken window. If we do that, we see that the value of the new window minus the value of the old but unbroken window is less than the value of the new suit. The suit is what's known as an opportunity cost. That's what you give up by spending money or time or effort on other things. As economists say, the best alternative foregone. So breaking the window destroys wealth. It doesn't create it. Now you can make the argument that when he puts in a new window, he's going to be putting in a better window. Maybe it'll be better insulated, maybe it'll be soundproof, or whatever. It'll be a better window. It doesn't matter. If he had thought that those improvements were worth it, if the value of having the new window was that great, he would have replaced his window without it having to be broken. And this is a big thing that people just don't get. One example is back at the end of 2004 when we had the Asian tsunami. It killed over 300,000 people. But there were a lot of pundits, usually from places that weren't affected by the tsunami, and they said that, well, there's going to be an economic benefit from this because of all the infrastructure that's going to have to be rebuilt. And when it's rebuilt, it's made better. And so the tsunami's a good thing. Well, okay, let's forgive the fact, as disgusting as it is to do so, let's forgive the fact that they're ignoring 300,000 lost lives. You can't really say that the new infrastructure is worth more than the old, given the costs they've had to incur. How many cities make improvements by evacuating everyone and then bombing themselves? They don't do it because it's not worth it. This is the broken window fallacy. Now, in Bastiat's parable of the broken window, everyone has different things like in any parable that they represent. The crowd represents the people, and the boy represents the government. And so what happens is the government comes along and smashes the window and says, "Hey, look, I'm making dubs!" And the people say, "Hey, yay, you're making dubs!" And the poor shop owner is out a new suit, which of course no one ever sees. And we'll see this, for example, when we talk about minimum wage. Minimum wage will have some people working for the new minimum wage, and they'll be thinking, "Hey, great, I'm making the new minimum wage and not the old one." What you don't consider is the people who lose their jobs because of the minimum wage. Because that's harder to see. And this is true with all sorts of stuff. Like when government takes tax money to pay for infrastructure projects and says it's stimulating the economy. It isn't. People say to tax the rich or to tax corporations, and that'll make the economy better. Again, they're not considering what would have been done with that money otherwise. All they're doing is stifling investment, which we all need to grow and prosper. And it's especially obvious when you have a popular Nobel Prize winning economist saying that the best thing for the economy would be if aliens attacked. We'll see all of this in more detail in the rest of this series, especially in Part 4. So anytime you consider the economic effects of any sort of government policy, think about the unintended consequences. Remember to look at all of the effects, not just the intended effects, and look at the consequences for all groups, not just the target groups. And always, always consider the hidden costs. Hopefully, that's common sense to you now. What does economics have to do with an ox and a jar of jelly beans? And how does it all show that no government can successfully manage an economy? That's up next in part 3.